Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tracing an absolutely fascinating arc, the rise and stumble of American nuclear power. We're going straight to the historical source material to figure out how this incredible military triumph, a literal game-changer, eventually turned into a frozen, hotly debated civilian industry. So we're going to break down the engineering, the intense bureaucracy, and the systemic challenges of a true technological revolution.
Let's jump right in with a big question. How exactly did nuclear power go from this golden age of limitless potential in the U.S. Navy to a completely stalled-out civilian industry by the late 1970s? We tend to think of nuclear energy as just one giant monolithic thing. But history actually shows us two wildly different stories playing out with the exact same technology. And understanding that split, it's absolutely crucial right now as we weigh the risks and the immense rewards of our own clean energy future. So, to really get how we got here, we got to go back to the beginning.
Back before the 1950s, submarines weren't really true underwater ships. Honestly, they were basically just surface vessels that occasionally dipped below the water. World War II-era diesel-electric subs, they were deadly for sure, but only in really short bursts. They had to constantly resurface or stick up snorkels just to recharge these massive batteries, and that made them incredibly vulnerable to radar. Plus, those batteries discharged hydrogen gas, which meant you were literally dealing with explosive hazards inside a metal tube. So, the promise of nuclear propulsion was just radical. We're talking a zero-emission engine, consuming no air, letting a sub run at sustained high speeds and cross entire oceans on a single core. Mind-blowing stuff at the time.
But to actually bring that promise to life, the Navy needed a total force of nature. Enter Captain Hyman G. Rickover, the guy everyone calls the father of the nuclear Navy. Rickover was this hard-driving, completely uncompromising engineering officer. And he actually knew the terrors of diesel-electric subs firsthand. Get this, he once volunteered to go below deck, completely on his own, to smother a battery fire just to stop a catastrophic explosion. That's the kind of guy we're talking about. He brought incredible program management skills to the table and absolutely refused to play nice with the bureaucratic status quo.
Because of that uncompromising nature, his standards were, frankly, legendary. There's this amazing little story from the sources. A vendor brings Rickover this gleaming, brand-new prototype of an electrical box, right? And they claim it's completely shockproof, which obviously is a big deal if your sub is taking depth charges. Well, Rickover takes one look at it, violently chucks the box against a cast-iron radiator where it instantly shatters into pieces, and then just walks back into his office without saying a single word. He demanded absolute excellence, because he knew the margin of error in a nuclear sub is exactly zero.
What's truly wild here is just how incredibly fast Rickover moved. Okay, 1946, he's at Oak Ridge studying this brand new technology. By 1948, he maneuvers the system to create a nuclear power branch inside the Navy. 1951, the actual submarine gets authorized. And by 1954, she's launched, and in 1955, less than a decade after that first study, the vessel sends out the historic message, "Underway on nuclear power." Just incredible. He wrangled a hesitant Navy and a pretty stubborn Atomic Energy Commission to pull off the impossible in record time. Now, the actual piece of tech that made the whole shebang work was the pressurized water reactor, or PWR. Westinghouse developed this initially for the Nautilus, and it basically used highly pressurized water to transfer heat from the reactors straight to the steam turbines. But the genius here was Rickover's mindset. He fundamentally believed that building a reactor wasn't some neat scientific experiment for a lab. No, this was a hardcore engineering problem. It demanded serious industrial partnerships and the most rigorous technical specs imaginable.
And man, she completely shattered all those old diesel-era limitations. The Nautilus proved something absolutely massive. If you could safely wedge a highly complex, miniaturized nuclear reactor into the incredibly tight, high-pressure confines of a submarine, well, you could use nuclear energy to power just about anything. It was this total, undeniable triumph of American engineering and sheer discipline.
Moving on to our next chapter, powering the civilian world, from submarines to cities.
So, that massive success under Rickover, it didn't just stay locked up in the military. It literally birthed the entire global civilian nuclear power industry. The Naval Nuclear Propulsion Program basically just handed over the keys, the foundational tech to get the civilian sector off the ground. We're talking the uranium dioxide fuel system, which, by the way, is still the most widely used system today. They handed over the baseline designs for those pressurized water reactors, the use of solid-state electronics, and honestly, maybe most importantly, the people. Thousands of highly trained Navy grads stepped right into key roles running civilian power reactors all over the country.
To really wrap your head around the scale of this knowledge transfer, just look at this number, 5,000. The Navy declassified and handed over more than 5,000 technical reports to industry and the general public. 5,000! It was this unbelievable open-source knowledge dump covering everything from corrosion to heat transfer to accident predictions. And that treasure trove of data directly fueled this incredibly rapid build-out of civilian nuclear infrastructure. I mean, things were moving really, really fast.
Which brings us to The Reckoning. 3 Mile Island, 1979.
So here is where the momentum just hits a brick wall. On March 28, 1979, the 3 Mile Island Unit 2 plant near Middletown, Pennsylvania suffers a partial meltdown. It instantly becomes the most serious accident in U.S. commercial nuclear history. Now, it is super important to note here that there were actually 0 deaths or injuries to plant workers or the local community. None. But the psychological shockwave and the regulatory backlash, it changed the industry forever.
When you look at the careful analysis afterward, you realize this wasn't just one broken pipe or one guy pushing the wrong button. It was a catastrophic combination of 3 things hitting all at once: personnel error, design deficiencies, and component failures. It was a cascade. Multiple unexpected things going wrong simultaneously, which completely overwhelmed and confused the operators who were just frantically trying to diagnose what was happening.
To really get why something like this happens, sociologists like Charles Perrow point to this concept called normal accidents theory. The basic idea is that in highly complex, tightly coupled systems, like a massive commercial nuclear reactor, having multiple unforeseen failures is actually kinda inevitable. The whole system is so hyper-interactive that when one little thing snaps, it triggers this chain reaction of other unexpected failures in ways that human operators just literally cannot diagnose in real time.
So let's take a step back and contrast these two worlds for a second. Why did the Navy pull this off so brilliantly while the civilian sector stumbled so hard with the exact same core tech? Well, think about the military environment Rickover built. It was intensely centralized, incredibly disciplined, and totally monolithic. He had ultimate authority, full stop. And he built this ruthless culture of safety. The civilian rollout, total opposite. It was decentralized, run by a bunch of different private utilities, all with different management styles, different training standards, and of course, profit motives. It was just a completely different ecosystem.
And the fallout from 3 Mile Island was just massive. Overnight, you saw sweeping changes to emergency response planning and how reactor operators were trained. The regulatory oversight from the NRC tightened up drastically, making the rules broader and way more robust. But the cultural hit, that was just as heavy. There was this huge spike in public fear and a total loss of trust in utility management. Suddenly, trying to build a new nuclear plant became insanely expensive and tangled up in endless legal red tape.
If you want to really grasp the sheer economic and political impact of that moment, just look at this staggering number, 52. Between 1980 and 1984, exactly 52 U.S. nuclear reactors that had already been ordered were abruptly canceled. Just wiped off the books. The entire industry practically froze overnight. For decades after TMI, virtually no new nuclear plants were ordered in the United States. Talk about hitting the brakes.
And in this moment of just sheer historical poetry, right as the civilian industry was icing over, the mighty USS Nautilus was gracefully retiring. She was decommissioned in 1980 and became a museum ship up in Groton, Connecticut. But you know what? That foundational technology and that obsessive safety culture Rickover built, it didn't retire with her. The U.S. Navy has consistently built at least one small nuclear reactor every single year since the 1950s, running this massive fleet with a safety record that is literally unparalleled.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. As we stare down today's global energy challenges and this massive, pressing need for reliable zero-emission power, we're looking at a dual legacy. Can we recapture that sheer engineering triumph and that disciplined safety culture of the Nautilus while somehow avoiding the complex, systemic failures of 3 Mile Island? The history is right there for us to learn from. Thanks so much for hanging out with me for this explainer. Until next time, keep exploring.